We're embarking on quite an incredible journey into Angola. It's a country nestled there in southern Africa, and it boasts a truly rich, complex history, huge resources, and a really vibrant culture that honestly often goes unexplored. So this is our deep dive. We've pulled together the research, the key articles for you, and our mission for this deep dive anyway is to kick off a two-part exploration. So today, part one will unpack Angola's early history. It's a fascinating political evolution in its economy, both, what it was and where it stands today.
Yeah, and understanding these foundations is just so critical. It's key to grasping where Angola is now and where it might be heading. When we connect this to the bigger picture, you'll really see how these historical threads, from ancient kingdoms through colonialism, that awful civil war, they weave directly into the fabric of modern Angola. It explains so much.
I totally agree. So let's start way back. Long before any Europeans showed up, pre-colonial Angola, it was this thriving land, home to various Bantu-speaking groups. These communities, they migrated, settled the region, let's say between 500 and 1000 CE, something like that. And they established really quite sophisticated societies. Among the records point to these powerful kingdoms like the Kingdom of Congo, Ndongo, and Lunda. These weren't just scattered tribes, they were organized states.
Right, and if we zoom in on Congo for just a sec, it was remarkably centralized, a proper political system. And what's fascinating here is it actually converted to Christianity pretty early on because of Portuguese missionaries, and it was actively trading with Europe before widespread colonization really took hold. So it just shows these African societies were already plugged into a wider world, not isolated at all.
That's such a crucial point. It really changes the narrative, doesn't it? So this early Portuguese contact, it starts late 15th century, initially just coastal trading posts, but then a really significant moment. Luanda is founded as a proper Portuguese settlement in 1575. That's them putting down roots, a real foothold.
Unfortunately, that foothold quickly turned into something much darker.
Yeah.
It led straight into one of the most devastating periods, the transatlantic slave trade. From the 17th right through the 19th centuries, Angola became just this massive source of enslaved Africans sent across the Atlantic, especially to Brazil. The impact was, catastrophic isn't even strong enough. It fundamentally altered Angolan society, tore communities apart, reshaped everything for centuries.
And the colonial grip just kept tightening. This all kind of came to a head in the late 19th century, specifically the 1885 Berlin Conference.
Yeah,
that infamous scramble for Africa where European powers basically carved up the continent. It formalized Portuguese rule inland, and crucially, it required what they called effective occupation. They had to actually control the territory, not just, claim it on paper.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Even in those early days facing this expansion, there was fierce opposition. The story of Queen Nzinga, of Ndongo and Matamba, incredible. 17th century, she led this amazing long resistance against the Portuguese. Just brilliant strategy, resilience against, frankly, overwhelming odds. It shows this incredible spirit of resistance right from the start.
Absolutely. A really powerful figure. But despite that kind of heroic resistance, by the 20th century, Angola was formally a Portuguese colony. And the administration was notoriously harsh. We're talking widespread forced labor systems, just extracting wealth, exploiting the people. It created this deeply unequal society.
Which sets the stage perfectly for the next chapter, right? That tumultuous path to actually becoming a nation. So, moving from the colonial era into the post-World War II period, you gotta remember, Angola was still governed directly by Portugal, no local autonomy to speak of, and those brutal forced labor systems still going strong. This colonial control plus, global shifts towards self-determination, it inevitably lit a fire. Post-World War II, anti-colonial feeling is sweeping across Africa, and nationalist movements start bubbling up in Angola. Three key players really emerge here. You've got the MPLA, the Popular Movement for the Liberation of Angola, mostly urban, kind of Marxist-Leninist leaning. Then the FNLA, the National Front for the Liberation of Angola, stronger ties to the old Congo Kingdom region. And UNITA, the National Union for the Total Independence of Angola. More rural support, central and southern areas, often seen as more nationalist conservative. These three become central, but crucially, they often had very different ideas about Angola's future.
Exactly. And their efforts build up to the Angolan War of Independence.
Right.
That runs from 1961 to 74. A really brutal conflict. But it ends, maybe surprisingly, not with a military win, but because of the Carnation Revolution back in Portugal in April 74. That wasn't just a coup in Lisbon. It basically dismantled Portugal's whole colonial empire overnight. It forced this really rapid, often messy, independence on places like Angola. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, I mean, this totally changed the game for the entire Southern African region.
Right. So November 11th, 1975, Angola finally gets independence. Huge day. Filled with hope, you'd imagine. But just tragically, the celebration was incredibly short-lived. Almost immediately, boom, a brutal civil war erupts. Essentially the same groups just continuing the fight for power.
And that civil war was primarily MPLA versus UNITA. The FNLA got pushed aside pretty early on. What made it so devastating, beyond just the internal fighting, was the international involvement, just massive. The MPLA gets bagging from the Soviet Union and Cuba. UNITA gets help from the US and, critically, apartheid South Africa. It's fascinating in a grim way how the global Cold War played out right there on Angolan soil with absolutely devastating local results. The war drags on until 2002. Millions displaced, over 500,000 dead. The human cost is just staggering. The trauma, the scars.
Just horrific. Thankfully, post-2002, there's a peace treaty. Peace is held, which is huge. But politically, the MPLA has remained the dominant party ever since that war ended. So if we look at Angola's political system now, okay, it's a presidential republic, but it's been, well, let's be frank, dominated by the MPLA for almost 50 years. They do have elections. There were ones in 2017, 2022, but the space for opposition parties, it's still pretty limited. It really shows the MPLA's grip.
And a huge figure in that long period of dominance was the former president, José Eduardo dos Santos. He ruled from 1979 all the way to 2017, an incredibly long time. The current president, João Lourenço, he came in promising big reforms, cracking down on corruption. But it's probably fair to say the results so far have been mixed.
It raises a big question, doesn't it? How hard is it to actually shift a political system, these entrenched ways of doing things, after decades of one-party rule and such a long, destructive conflict?
That's a massive challenge. And it leads us perfectly into the economy, our next section. Because right from the start, the colonial economy was just purely extractive, designed purely to benefit Portugal. Heavy reliance on forced labor plantations, mines just taking wealth out of the land and off the backs of the people.
Yeah, and then right after independence, there's this immediate shift. They try to nationalize the economy, bring in state control, which, you saw that in a lot of newly independent African countries. It was a common trend. But for Angola, it immediately slammed into a huge wall.
The Civil War.
It didn't just cost lives, it systematically wiped out infrastructure. Roads, bridges, hospitals, schools gone or just falling apart. It totally crippled agriculture, stopped any real industrial development in its tracks. It set the country back decades economically. But amidst all that chaos, there was this discovery, something huge: oil, found offshore in large quantities back in the 1960s. This black gold was going to change everything.
Oh, absolutely. And by the 2000s, after the war, oil just became dominant, overwhelmingly so. We're talking over 90% of exports, maybe 50% of GDP, the gross domestic product. And this fueled really rapid economic growth, especially between about 2002 and 2014. There was a global oil boom. It looked like Angola was finally, taking off. Butte, this massive reliance on one thing, oil, it brought all the classic problems of what people call the resource curse. It's this paradox, right? Countries with massive natural wealth, like oil, often struggle with development, inequality, because things like corruption get easier, there's less need to diversify the economy. In Angola's case, what's fascinating here is how the oil wealth, while boosting growth, cemented a political system less accountable to its people. State money flows straight from oil, not really from taxing citizens in the same way. So that link between government and people gets weaker. Patronage thrives. Wealth got super concentrated among a small elite. Very little diversification, lots of corruption. This whole patronage system really held back broader progress.
And the danger of that kind of economy became crystal clear. That oil price crash, 2014 to 2016, it hit Angola so hard, just exposed how vulnerable they were, plunged the country into crisis. So in response, the current president, Lourenço, he's been trying to diversify, pushing initiatives, right? Trying to revive agriculture, develop other mining diamonds, sure, but also rare earths now, offering incentives for manufacturing, trying to get foreign investment in, and there's been international help too from the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, efforts to restructure debt. Okay, let's unpack this though. Are these efforts actually making a difference on the ground for ordinary?
Well, looking at the 2020s, you see gradual stabilization. That's good news, definitely. But Angola is still really reliant on oil money, the diversification. It's happening slowly, if at all, in some areas. The economy hasn't fundamentally shifted yet, and the big, persistent challenge remains: massive inequality, significant poverty rates across the country. Which brings up that critical question again: how does a country actually break free from that resource curse? How do you make sure the wealth benefits everyone, not just a few? It's a really tough, long road.
And that really brings us towards the end of part 1 of our deep dive into Angola. We've covered a lot of ground from those powerful pre-colonial kingdoms through the trauma of colonialism, the absolute devastation of the Civil War, right up to today's oil-dependent, still quite fragile economy. It's been, remarkable, often heartbreaking, but also you see this thread of resilience. So as you think about everything we've talked about, maybe just consider that resilience, the sheer strength of the Angolan people overcoming such immense challenges. And think about that tension, that constant push and pull between the country's vast natural wealth, the potential, and the daily reality for so many citizens. That promise of black gold versus, life on the ground.
It's definitely a complex picture, but like you said, full of potential too. And for our next deep dive, we'll pick up right there. We'll explore Angola's huge tourism potential, its incredibly rich culture, the music, the art, and we'll look at the evolving challenges, but also the hopes for the future, because there's always more to learn and connect when you're talking about a country this dynamic.
Absolutely. So